Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do my January wrap-up part 2. I will leave a link to the first part of my wrap-up up above if anyone hasn't watched that yet. The first book I finished reading after the last wrap-up that I did was actually Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier, but I'm actually not going to talk about this here because I have a full video review of this book out already. Leave that linked above and below. I loved this book so much, I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, but for my full review you'll have to watch that video. The next book I read was Supper Club by Lara Williams. This is a book I picked up due to it being the book club pick for Lara in the Book's Patreon book club. This is a very interesting book about a group of women who start this thing called a supper club, and what it is, it's kind of both physically and metaphorically a time for the women in this club to kind of take up space, both with kind of their voices, their personalities and their bodies. And what they do is they will sit down to this really gorgeous, succulent, huge meal, and they will just eat and eat and eat and talk, do certain things at this supper club that might be seen as maybe being unseemly, like at different points in their lives. And it's just basically like this point in time where they can be loud and brash and bigger than they have been previously. So this was an interesting book for me because there were parts of it that I did really enjoy. There were some bits around like food and cooking, tasty and lovely to read about and things like that would really make your mouth water, but there were other parts of the book that were like almost on the crude side for me, that was almost too much, and things that I didn't really enjoy that much. I found the main character Roberta to be kind of a hard character to follow because I found her to be a little bit infuriating at times. She was someone who seemed to like want all of these things but was very not someone who would actually strive to get there. She seemed happy to kind of be in this section in her life where she wasn't really applying herself with anything. She wasn't really, motivated to do anything, yet at the same time she always felt a little bit like on the outside. She always felt like someone who wasn't going to be invited to things, but then again she would never step forward, and at times she made it very difficult for people to involve her in things. And for that, like, I do definitely understand a part of that. It can be hard sometimes to step into things when you always feel like you might be on the outside, and it can be a very terrifying prospect to kind of put yourself out there sometimes. But there were times for Roberta that I wasn't really sure exactly what she wanted, and I don't think she ever knew either, and I'm not even sure at the end of this book she even knew. I'm not sure if there was a lot of character development within Roberta that she knew what she wanted by the end of this book. I felt like she was still slightly confused, and I'm not sure if she was really happy by the end of the book. I gave this book a 2.5 out of 5 stars overall. It was like okay, I don't know, I just don't think I clicked with the writing as much as other people did, and the story itself and the characters were just a little bit, too far from the type of characters that I think I personally like, that I was able to enjoy them completely. The next book I read was Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson, and this was an absolutely gorgeous book. And this is around 2 characters. This is all told in second person narrative. We are getting the male point of view between these 2 people. I actually don't think you ever find out their names, and they are both living in London. Both of them are black, and they start this relationship, and its first is a friendship, and it kind of blossoms over the course of the book into this really intense love and this really beautiful relationship between the 2 of them. And we're finding out about these 2 people, kind of what they love and hate, and the relationship, I guess, that they start to form, and that those really strong bonds that they start to form between them, that they need each other in their lives. This book is a really good, just gorgeous exploration into what it's like to be a black British person, a black person living in London, and also in particular a black man living in London. And I feel like a lot of the books I've read previously that were like being told by a black character or around this type of topic, I always felt like it was from the a female point of view, because I generally do tend to read books about women and written by women, and this is one of the first books I've read about a black male and his point of view, and just this really amazing vulnerable look into what it's like to be him, and what it's like to be him as a black man who is both proud of his heritage, proud of being both British and Ghanaian, and proud of his skin colour, and proud of who he is, proud of being a black man, but also at the same time being afraid every time he walks outside of his door, in case that's the last time he walks outside of his door, in case it's the last time he sees his family. The fear that he feels at different points in this book because of things that are like not in his control, because of stereotypes people might have against him because of the colour of his skin. And even just things like where, if it's not just maybe racism, it could be something just like knife crime or gang violence, and how even though he is so far removed from that, like personally, like it's not something that he has ever been involved with, it's not something that he has ever had to deal with, but it still touches him and it still affects him when he sees people being lost in that way, and it still has a very, very deep impact on him. This book is literally like poetry. It just has this really beautiful way of describing things. I have a review down below and I have some of my favourite quotes that I really liked when I was reading this book. But there's just so many beautiful things. There's so much vulnerability in this book from this character, and also his struggle to show his vulnerability and to show his vulnerability to the woman that he loves. His pressure to be, you know, strong and to, you know, be able to just like deal with these things. But he really struggles like with his fears and with his sorrow about different things in his life. And when he kind of eventually does open that up, it is just so gorgeous to see, and it is so needed, and I really, really loved it. This is one of those type of books where like there's particular music that came to mind when I was reading this, and it's actually the soundtrack of If Beale Street Could Talk, and there's just something about that music where it's so beautiful and a little bit mournful that like just played, that I wanted to listen to it when I was reading this book. And then there was actually a point in this book where the character talked about that movie, so like it was kind of really like fun for me and like a nice thing for me that it kind of came full circle. So I really, really, really love this. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I really recommend it for people to read, and it's out this year and it is just stunning. It's gorgeous and you have to read it. Another book I absolutely loved this month as well that I read, and I listened to it on audiobook that I received through NetGalley, that was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, and I listened to this on audiobook and it was narrated by Chiwetel Ejiofor, and oh my god, his narration was stunning. I loved the narration of this book so much. There's just something about Chiwetel's like voice and like the tone of his voice or something that reminded me of listening to Shakespeare. I don't know why. I'm not sure if he's ever narrated Shakespeare, and maybe I've always said before that when I read a Shakespeare play, I will normally listen to some sort of narration of it on YouTube, and normally it's like a BBC radio adaptation of it, of the play. And I have a feeling that he must have done something with one of those before, because for some reason when I was listening to this narration, I was thinking of how it's also the type of voice that I would imagine narrating Shakespeare. But the audiobook was amazing of this. Really, really recommend. This is an interesting book to try and explain. We're basically following a man called Piranesi. We know he lives in this really, really ginormous house, and it seems to have like countless halls and corridors, and there's different like levels of this house where like there's certain things there. We know there's bones in like one corridor, there's like a tide that comes through this house, like fish and water and birds, and the house provides things for Piranesi when he needs them. This book is all told through kind of almost journal entries that Piranesi is writing, and we know that once or twice a week he meets someone called the Other, and this Other is just the only other kind of human person that Piranesi ever sees. And throughout the course of the book, we're kind of finding out who Piranesi is, why he is in this house, what this house is, where is this house, and like what is going on, who is the Other, how is he connected to Piranesi, and just all these things kind of start slotting into place over the course of the book as Piranesi himself starts to kind of ask some questions that he doesn't seem to have like asked before, and he starts finding out different things. This is one of those books where like for most of it like you don't have any clue like what's going on, but the book is written so beautifully and the story is just narrated and explored so perfectly that it just keeps you hooked, and you just can't stop listening or reading until you find out. This is one that I gave it a 4.5 stars on audiobook. I think it would be a 5 out of 5 stars if I read it, reread it and read it in physical format, and I was able to get the absolutely full picture. I think this is a book that on a reread will be even more interesting because you kind of already know what's going on, so you might be able to pick up more things from the start of the book. So I'm already really looking forward to getting my own copy of this book and reading it and absolutely enjoying it even more than the first time, even though I absolutely loved it the first time. I just love this so much, and I just think it is one of the most interesting books I've ever read, and one of the most unique books I've ever read, and one of those books that just makes me think of how extraordinary the human mind is, that someone can come up with this story. I just think it's absolutely amazing that Susanna Clarke was able to sit down and write this story and bring this story to life in such a way, because it is just absolutely unique and beautiful, and I loved it. The next book I read was Indelible by Karin. This is the 4th book in the Grant County series, where we are following a woman called Sarah, who is the county coroner, and her ex-husband Jeffrey, who is the chief of police. And throughout this series we are following Jeffrey and Sarah as they kind of deal with the on-off relationship that the two of them have, while they also normally team up together to solve a murder or some sort of mystery in the town. This is a very dark and violent series, and this book was obviously no exception, because it literally opens up, the first chapter opens up with Sarah and Jeffrey being in the police station, and a man walks in and starts shooting people in the police station, and Sarah and Jeffrey end up being held hostage in this police station. And then the story flashes back 12 years earlier at the very, very start of Sarah and Jeffrey's relationship, where they travel to Jeffrey's hometown to meet his parents and his childhood friends, and they end up kind of getting involved in a shooting and a murder investigation in this town as well. And while we are kind of getting the past and present storylines, we're kind of trying to see if there's some sort of connection between the two storylines, which could be a reason why the present storyline of the shooter is happening. I really enjoyed this, as I have enjoyed all the Grant County books that I've read so far, and this one definitely kept me completely hooked from the start. I always find as soon as I start reading these books, I find it very, very hard to put them down, because they are just so addictive. They're very fast paced and you just cannot stop reading until you find out all the answers. There are some bits in this book that always kind of irritate me a bit, things around like language that is used by some of the characters. There's also a little bit of homophobia in this book, and there is talk around rape as well, and accusations of rape. Also in this book, I find that there's a lot of misogynistic language used, not only by the male characters but by the female characters. Even our main female character Sarah, like there's often points in this book and in the other books where she thinks of people as sluts or whores, or you know, that kind of language towards other women that isn't always particularly pleasant to read about. It was a really interesting bit. I got this from my library on the BorrowBox app, and there was an interview with Karin Slaughter at the end of this book that I read, and it was really interesting, some of the things she was saying around how she writes women, and particularly how she writes women who have been victims of abuse, and how she wants to kind of have someone who isn't just this perfect survivor, but someone who still carries that trauma with them and reacts to trauma in a certain way. And also how she is also being treated differently, or her books have different reactions because she is a woman writing about such violence and dark topics, and how that is still something that is almost a little bit taboo and something you don't see that often, where she doesn't think that she would receive the same criticism if she was a man. And I do think that was definitely true, and probably definitely true at the start of her career, maybe not so much now, but it still is a little bit shocking now and again to have a woman write about such dark things, and things like assault and rape, and the type of kind of assault cases that she writes about. Must be very, very hard to write, especially as a woman writing about these kind of this type of violence on other women. But it was definitely very interesting, that interview, and kind of made me think about how I think about her books as well, and how I respond to her books. So yeah, it was just kind of interesting. I just wanted to mention that. The book I finished was Green Valley by Louis Greenberg. This is a book I received from Titan Books a couple of years ago in exchange for an honest review, and I finally got around to it. This is a kind of sci-fi mystery book where we are following a woman called Lucy, who lives in this city where invasive technology is basically being banned. So no one has like mobile phones, social media networks, people don't really use the internet for things like around socializing or social media. She finds out that her niece is in trouble and could be in danger of being abducted, and she ends up traveling to this place called Green Valley, which is this bunker within this city where people live completely separate lives from the inhabitants of the city, and they basically live their entire lives through virtual reality and virtual simulations. And Lucy is basically trying to figure out if there is a link between what is happening in Green Valley and this danger that has been posed to these children and these children's bodies that are starting to turn up in the city. This started out quite interesting, and I did really enjoy the concept of this around virtual reality, I guess the effects that virtual reality could bring, and again even the effects of a world where like particular types of technology is banned, and how that can actually have a bad effect as well as a good one, and how like there has to be some sort of peaceful like medium between the two. There has to be something in between the two that is the perfect solution. I really liked Lucy's kind of forays into Green Valley and learning about how the virtual reality works, but there was a lot of this where I just couldn't really see how things would happen the way they happened in this book, and how things could get to an extent to what they did in this book as well. There are parts of it around the simulation and things that Lucy experiences when she's in Green Valley as well that didn't make that much sense and was just kind of confusing and felt a little bit trippy at times, and I wasn't really sure how to respond to that. As well, near the end of the book, I felt like the end of the book was very abrupt and like was really anticlimactic, like nothing really happened. It kind of just like fizzled out. The end of the book like really fizzled out, and I was like, oh, okay, that's it. I just felt a little bit disappointed. I felt like there was going to be some more reveals, or like, I don't know, but it felt like everything that happened was very like level. There was no big reveal. It was kind of, you kind of knew a lot of things from the start, and yeah, it was a little bit like boring, to be honest. And yeah, I just felt a little bit surprised that it was so anticlimactic at the end. I think the concept of this book is really interesting, and I actually think it would make a really, really good Black Mirror episode where it was condensed and put into like, you know, obviously a visual format. But yeah, for a book, it just kind of disappointed me, so I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And then the last book I read was The Hopes and Dreams of Lucy Baker by Jenni Keer. This is a book I've had on my NetGalley list for a while, and this is a book I chose for the Buzz Wordathon Readathon this year because January's word of the month was dream, so this fit into that. In this book we are following a character called Lucy she's 25 years old. She's someone who isn't particularly, like, she's not mad sociable, she doesn't really have a lot of confidence, and she kind of just prefers to be at home in her little flat knitting away. Friend and her neighbour, who's like her elderly neighbour, is kind of one of her best friends, and the two of them end up kind of concocting this little thing between the two of them when another neighbour moves in, and he's grumpy but he's also gorgeous, and Lucy has a little bit of a crush on him, so the two of them kind of hatch this plan to try and make him fall in love with Lucy. But during this, the neighbour also is diagnosed with dementia, so Lucy starts kind of caring for Barbara, her elderly neighbour, and is kind of dealing with that while also kind of dealing with things in her work life and her possible romance life as well. This book was just fun and lovely and sweet, and I just really enjoyed it for what it was, which was just a lovely read. Lucy's definitely a lovely character to follow. She's someone that you would see yourself being friends with. I really liked her job in this. She worked in a toy warehouse, and I just found that actually really interesting, and like there were some bits around like the sales side of it as well that, yeah, it was just something kind of unique that I haven't seen before in other books, and I just found that quite interesting. There was like a magical element of this book as well that involved a magical locket that Lucy was given by her neighbour to help her kind of try and make your man fall in love with her, and that was something I hadn't expected, but was kind of a sweet, cute element to the book. I think if you had taken that bit out, the story would kind of almost be the same. I don't think it made a massive difference to the story, but it was just kind of a nice element to have in there. The relationship did kind of, I was a bit iffy about it at first because I wasn't sure if there was much chemistry between George and Lucy, but it definitely warmed itself up to be near the end of it. This book definitely made me laugh a few times, and there were just like, yeah, some giggles here and there. There's also obviously a very sad element to this book, and like an element to this book that I say some people could find maybe slightly triggering, because Barbara is diagnosed with dementia quite early on in the book, and you do see like how that kind of starts affecting her over the course of the book, over the few months that the book is set, and just how her memory kind of gets a little bit worse, and some of the things that like she's starting to forget, and the things that she needs care for. And I'm sure like there could be people who don't like to read about that. It's not a massive element of the book, but it's definitely something just to be aware of. Really enjoyed this book overall. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I do recommend it for a nice read. So that is everything I have read in January. I hope you guys had a really great reading month. I definitely had such a good reading month. I didn't expect to read as much as I did, I think, in January. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you guys have been reading, what your favourite book in January was, and I will see you guys again next time.